On today's episode of the Think Bigger Mastermind, get into the mind of an ultra marathoner as we speak with Scott Laplante. Welcome to the Think Bigger Mastermind with Steve Yeager and Justin Stoddard, where we interview some of the world's brightest and most innovative minds, helping grow your thinking, your actions, and your impact. All right, excited to be here with you today. I've got a gentleman here that's become a friend of mine, Scott Laplante. Quick background on Scott. In fact, let me let Scott say hello real quick.
Hi, Justin. Morning.
Hey, good morning. Glad you're here on the show. So Scott's background, Scott is the owner of Sherwood Auto Repair here in the greater Portland area, father of two boys, kind of a really well-known figure in his space when it comes to kind of the auto repair business from a customer service standpoint, et cetera, an educator, kind of one of the first to receive kind of the ASC certification, just an expert in that space. So that you know he's got kind of a busy life outside of what we're going to talk about today and how he's been able to balance it all, run a great business, which I recommend you visiting if you haven't had the chance, but also how he does and fits the time in for what we're going to talk about today. Scott, I'm going to paint a picture here before I kind of open up to some questions for Scott. But what was it, 6 years ago, Scott? Is that right?
Yep, 6 years ago.
6 years ago, Scott looked very different than the man I'm looking at across the table today. Scott right now is a specimen, like the guy, in fact, ultra marathoner, kind of tells it all, but super good shape, looks healthy, fit, etc. 6 years ago, that wasn't the case.
No, that's right.
He was 255 pounds, borderline hypertension,
yep.
And had... just was dealing with stress in unhealthy ways.
Indeed,
is there
right.
kind of a better way to put that, Scott?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, just had lots of life lessons to learn at that point for sure.
Obviously, running a business in which you're customer facing, you have stressful situations, etc. And so he got to a point to where his health was kind of on the rocks.
Diminishing for sure.
And the doctor came to him and said, here's some medication you can take, and he kind of shoved it back and said, I'm not gonna do that. There's gonna be another way. And his suggestion was what, Scott?
He said, he threw his prescription pad down and said, I suppose you could exercise.
I suppose, right? The one other alternative that nobody really wants to go.
Exactly. So I got on a different path with hypertension diet, and that was kind of the first step. And then with a little studying and looking at stress management, things like that, one thing led to another, and that got me to my first attempt at a run.
Describe that to us. It's quite the funny story, okay? So it's funny because of like the man I'm looking at right now. You don't have the privilege of seeing, but describe that. Like, how long was it, and how did you feel at the end?
So I headed out from my house, and I started out on this path that I travel frequently now, and I got to about the half-mile point, and I was expired. My lungs felt like they were on fire, and my face was beet red. If I could have seen it, I'm sure that it was glowing beet red. And I just decided at that point that run was over, and I walked home. And I took a few days to kind of recover from that and did a little research, and I found a coach had written something about walk run. I think it was Jeff Galloway, and so in my mind it gave me permission to run for 30 seconds and walk for 30 seconds or a minute, and I just did that until I could run a mile, and then 2 and 5, and that was the beginning.
Very cool. That was the start. So then at that point, you had a gentleman come into your life by the name of Clemens.
Correct.
And he helped you to think bigger, right?
Indeed, he did. We were on a more or less social Saturday morning outing. with a small group of guys, and they were talking about this upcoming 50K trail run. And I asked naively, how far is 50K? And he said, it's 10 times a 5K, so it would be 31.2 miles. And I said, oh, okay, wow. And so he started asking me a few questions about how far I had run and what my habits were like. And I explained to him I was running 4 or 5 miles a day, 4 or 5 days a week. And he suggested stretching one of my runs out a little further, and that in the time that we had between this November conversation and the February when the race was, I had time to train for it. So he planted the seed that gave me the confidence to allow me to think that beyond the scope of what my limits had been at that point. And I went home after that run, and I signed up within a half hour of being home. And I had a little anxiety over that after pulling the trigger on it, of course, because it was big. It was a lot bigger thinking than what I had experienced in this realm of my life at that point. And I just set out to conquer it and whittled away at the workouts, and before I knew it, the day was there, and went and got it done.
Now, you became a student of a guy by the name of Dean Karnazes. Anybody who is in the running space knows the name, probably one of the world's foremost ultra marathoners.
Indeed.
And he taught you a lesson that kind of stuck in your mind as you went on these difficult runs.
For sure. He described the process of getting through a big task like an ultra marathon as the quote, I think, is, don't worry about the last step. The only step that you need to worry about is the next step. So in regards to that, it just breaks down the big tasks. Naturally, in this instance, it was about completing an ultra marathon, but it applies definitely to other aspects of my life. And so during this 50K, I come back around to that. There's it's just like life. There's highs and lows, and it just is in a shorter period of time. It's during the course of this.
Kind of a microcosm of life.
That's right, yeah. And it has been said that it's a life in a day for a 100-miler. And so, when you get low, I just would employ those techniques and come back around to just the next step. And that became just to the next aid station, and then the next aid station was the finish, and I was done.
Let's talk about this concept a little bit, because as you've mentioned, there's all kinds of applications to that oftentimes I think people get stuck in paralysis.
Absolutely.
Because they have such a big goal. Correct. That it's almost daunting, they don't want to get started. Or vice versa, they have such a big hole that they've got to climb out of, right, that they just stay where they are because all they can see is all the steps they have to take.
That's it, exactly.
So if you can focus on, like you said, the next step or the next aid station, right? Get to a certain point, that's your only focus.
Exactly.
Life doesn't exist beyond that.
Right.
Then obviously it kind of chunks it down into bite-sized pieces. Tell me, you shared with me prior an experience you had with a lady that wanted to kind of turn back on that path. Yeah. During the Hag Lake 50K.
That's correct.
And kind of what that did for you.
Yeah, so it's 2 loops, and we were still on the first loop, approximately halfway through the scope of the race.
In beautiful conditions on this day?
Oh, it was terrible conditions. I suppose it's perspective, but right. Mid-February, it's called the Hag Lake Mud Run, and it lives up to its name every year. It's a trail, between the lake and the paved road that drives around. And a week prior, it had snowed, so there was slush in the standing water in sections of the trail, and it was pretty horrible. It became an aspect of the task, and so we're at the last aid station before the start finish area. And she was grousing about how awful she felt, how cold it was, and everything. And I said, "You're already here. You can do it. Just keep going." And it was my first race of this scope at all. But I was just motivated to say something to her to encourage her to keep going because she'd already made the commitment. She was wet, muddy, and cold. just keep going, just the next step, just the next stopping point is the start finish, rally, and then keep going. And she finished, and it empowered me to encourage her.
Because all of a sudden you're, partway through your journey, you were the guy that could really use a pickup back in the day.
Exactly.
And now all of a sudden the tables have turned and you're picking people up. Like you're the Glenn Clemens, right?
Indeed.
Kind of you're the Dean Karnazes of saying like, hey, you got this. One more step, right. You got this.
Yeah.
Super powerful. So I think for all of us that aspire to think bigger, live bigger, have greater impact, look around for those that might be struggling a little bit on the path.
Exactly.
Not only will it help them, but what I'm hearing you say is that you felt empowered, that you were actually able to do more because you lifted her.
Absolutely. It helped me tremendously.
Let's talk a little bit about, was it a few weeks later that you had meant to sign up for a 50K, which is, again, 30 plus miles in the Columbia River Gorge. That one filled up really quickly. Only thing left was 100K.
Correct.
And so here you are, and you just said, why not, right? Double it, baby, double it. I just about died on a 50K, but let's do 100K.
Well, it was a while after this first tag leg, but just the same, it was a big step to this 100K. And so couldn't get into the 50K. It's very popular, close by here to Portland, and it's a beautiful spot in the Columbia River Gorge. So the 100K is a much bigger task, and it's a lot less popular. So
for obvious reasons.
So we, I decided that would, it's a progression, and it would be a good next step. So I thought, why not? So what's next? And I signed up for it and went to training for it, and I had a little more structure to my training and tried to do some on-site training out there in the gorge, so I got some of the elevation and things like that. And on the day of, I started out, and it's a relatively big field for a race like that, and we immediately start to climb really steep narrow trails, so it's pretty much a march up to the top of one of these waterfalls. And then we traverse and kind of head down Multnomah Falls, the footpath, and it goes from rocky trail to rocky dirt trail with relatively good traction to this paved path that a lot of people will walk up to see the top of the falls. And so we're cruising along down this path, and really overconfident about the traction, and I slipped and fell when I went to transition around this left-hand switchback, and I, out of instinct, jutted my left arm out and caught it on a big rock and went all the way down. When I rolled over on my knees and hands to push myself up, I felt there was nothing, I couldn't feel my left shoulder at all, and had no power. So the guy that I had been running along with helped me up, and we were having a conversation. I was thinking to myself, man, I got to be done. I'm really hurt, and it was incredible pain. And I was just kind of meandering my way down the path, and he engaged me and asked me a question just as the trail turned to continue the race, and instead of continue down the path and back to the start-finish area where my vehicle was. So I got distracted by the question and just followed it down the path, down the trail. So then next thing I knew, I was 4 miles on to the first aid station. And so I thought, well, I'm here, I might as well continue. And so I just broke it down a little bit at a time and tried to focus on where I was and the beauty of the place I was in, and just to keep moving forward and one foot in front of the next until I got to the next aid station and the next one and the next one, until I got in 3 minutes before the cutoff at 16 hours and 57 minutes.
So on the path to doing bigger things, hopefully there's all kinds of lessons that are showing up for you. There's all kinds of reasons why you could turn back, right? For Scott, he was 5 miles into a 60-plus mile race, and he had partially dislocated his shoulder. He learned that later, but if you've ever paid attention to how you run, your arms are a critical part of running. It's not just your legs.
Right.
And that shoulder going back is a critical part of it. And you can imagine not being able to do that, and or every time you do it, you're in severe pain. And there's no guarantee that as you start to think bigger and do bigger things, that it's going to be a smooth ride. It's not. It's going to be hard, and it's going to test your mettle, right?
Indeed, yeah.
And your mettle was tested here big time. I love that story. That's super, inspiring. One thing that you mentioned earlier, that I want to highlight is after you finish the first 50K, you ask the question, "What's next?"
Indeed, yeah.
Right? And that question's probably going through your mind right now, even though like now you've done a 100-miler. Right. It's probably like, "What's next? Like, do I do it again? Do I do in fact, you've already told me what's next, right?"
Yeah. Well, that's kind of becomes the thing, is what's next. All of these different distances and even the different race courses of a similar distance are either lesser or more challenges, or different type of challenging in a different way. The weather on a particular day, or extreme elevation gain. And so even within that scope, what's next can become a critical question. Right. And then once you have obtained a certain distance, then the what's next seems to just come forth as it has momentum. And even during the worst parts of it, almost immediately afterwards, that's what comes to mind. That was awesome. Can't believe, or I'm just so happy that I finished it and accomplished this task. What's next? What does it look like to do something even bigger? What does it look like to bring it harder next time if I was to do the same race? How do I feel? Could I feel better after doing something like this? And I've been able to experience that to a degree, and the answer is yes. I mean, it only gets better. It just keeps getting better.
So had you stopped after that first, whether 15 miles, that first 50K, and decided, like, that's enough, right? Like, I don't need to think any bigger than this. This is good. You would have literally missed out on the joy and the exhilaration and the personal growth that came by asking that question, what's next?
Exactly.
How do I push myself?
That's right.
How do I do the next thing?
Yeah.
You talk about, in fact, there was somebody else that came into your mind, or that came into your life to help you even think bigger.
That's right. Drake Tolinar.
Okay. Tell us about kind of what he was up to and what he then invited you to do.
So Drake Tolinar is now a great friend of mine, and at the time that I was recovering from the shoulder injury, I went to see him. He's a chiropractor, Cornerstone Chiropractic in King City, Oregon. And he is an ultra marathoner. I had heard his name from Glenn Clemens and some of my clients that were clients of his, and they caught wind of what I was doing, and they asked me if I knew him. So I thought it was an appropriate time to go see him, to get some help with my shoulder and kind of just put eyeballs on me, because he has some experience in this field with the ultra running, and it turned out to be a fantastic partnership. So he has done Ironman triathlons and Ultraman and a handful of 100-milers, plus many other ultra marathons, and so he suggested that we do some training together and then build up to myself completing a 100-miler, and he asked me to pace him at a 100-mile event at a race called Mountain Lakes 100 here in Oregon, between Mount Hood and Mount Jefferson. And so that was my first exposure to the 100-mile race kind of scene, which the ultramarathons all kind of a similar feel, but that step from 100K to a 100-miler, it generally takes over 24 hours. And so it takes on kind of a little bit more of that type of feel, like it's a long-term thing. It's not going to be done in a day.
Yeah, you're running for more than 24 hours. Crazy.
For me, it takes more than 24 hours. So
this experience now, so you've observed, Drake actually do this, right? And so that obviously planted the seed in your head, like why not me? Like, what's next for me?
That's right.
You had mentioned something earlier about how the first half of the race is ran with your body. The second half is ran with your mind.
Right.
Talk to us about the actual 100-miler that you did, right? It was in southern Utah.
Yep.
And I'm sure times along there where your body's like, are you crazy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like your mind has to override your body.
That's right. So I did Zion 100 April 7th and 8th, 2017 this year. And it was my first time to that area of the country, and beautiful. I picked it because of the location, the timing of the event, where my training was and everything else. And I also plan to do Mountain Lakes in September, so give me time to recover and train for that. So Drake had suggested a couple different races, and we settled on Zion 100 for those reasons, and he agreed to do it with me so that I would, if I experienced something that I had a hard time overcoming, that he could help kind of steer me in the right direction. And everyone's fear is, beyond the distance that you had previously run, is the unknown. What's going to happen, right? Or what are the possibilities? And if you let the negative thinking creep in, it very easily becomes the biggest thing, right? And mostly, you worry about things that don't ever happen. So we traveled down there and just tried to enjoy the area and just familiarize myself with the terrain a little bit, and then started out, and it was a fantastic day and a half of running, really. It's hard to say it was a fantastic day. It took 32 hours. You
don't stop and sleep. Like you just run.
Just run, hike the hills, aid station every 6 to 8 miles on this course, and refuel and take care of blisters and things like that if you have to. And we had crew meet us at certain points that were allowed. And the first 50, like, mostly is physical, and the second is mental. So they're low points, and it's pretty natural for your mind to go to the negative. And I did enough thinking about that ahead of time to remind myself that when those patterns started, to make it go the other way and maintain positive mental momentum. And I would think, like, the most simple question I ask all the time, every day, is, how does this get better? How does this get better? And it's amazing the power it has. It will just turn things around. And it's just like, I believe, if you think about how bad it could possibly be, things head in that direction. Mm-hmm. So it's that simple. Just, how does this get better? One foot in front of the other, relentless forward motion, and just make it to the next aid station.
So by asking that question, I think this is a key for all of us that are on the Think Bigger path, right? Is that your mind tends to focus on whatever you put into it.
Right.
And so if you're asking yourself the question, how does this get better? Your mind then seeks for answers to that question.
Indeed.
If it's like, if it's a weak question, right?
Right.
It's like, am I seriously injured? Am I going to get, am I hurt? Like, am I going to die? Am I going to, like, all these crazy thoughts?
Sure.
Your body starts to work on that, right?
Exactly.
As opposed to, how does this get better? Your mind starts to find a way to create different solutions for it. You just said something else, relentless forward motion. Is that something that you say, or that you, how do you implement that when you're out in these crazy stretches of barren running land?
Well, it is. There are typically less than 300 people that do these events of that magnitude, and so you end up alone. Mm-hmm. And for big stretches, everyone of all of the 300 would end up for hours totally by yourself. So it just really goes along with all of the other only worry about the next step, keep moving forward. Karl Meltzer said, eat, drink, and keep moving. And you just break it down. It's breaking it down to the simplest aspect of what it is that you're doing. And like Dean Karnazes and Karl Meltzer are are at the top of the ultra marathoning scope, and they still use the breaking down the task to the simplest of terms. And so I felt like if those guys are doing that, I'm going to take that lead, and it really makes it possible. So, I feel like as the bigger tasks I overcome and I take on and accomplish, that the steps become much bigger and much easier to conceive that how does this get better? What's next? What does it look like for me to do this or accomplish this or take this on? And it translates to all aspects of my life. The runs, the races themselves are more the party, and the training is the journey. And so you get to celebrate all that training and everything that you have done to build up to that, and then you employ some of these techniques and mental games to improve your motivation and your how you feel at the time during the race, and then it's like you've finished it, and it's the culmination of all the work that you've done.
That's the game day. That's the celebration, like you said.
Exactly.
Now, you had mentioned something about visualization and getting through these challenging times. So part of your training was physical, but if half the race you're running physical and like the rest of it's mental, you actually went through and go through mental training.
I do, yeah.
And what does that look like?
So I do some breath work and meditation. As my training is tapering down and I'm getting closer to an event, I'll visualize myself crossing the finish line. I'll visualize and envision dealing with low spots in a positive way. And it's pretty much that simple. I don't think about the million possible low spot issues that could come up, injury, stomach issues, headache, those things, dehydration, hunger and fatigue. I just think in general about dealing with the low spots in a positive way. And so it doesn't need to be defined specifically, just that I will deal with it in a positive way, and it will have a positive outcome. So I think along in terms like that. And when I don't know what the finish area specifically looks like, I envision the feeling of being done, of crossing the finish line and knowing that I don't have to run another step. I'm done. I accomplished the task, and I can enjoy the overwhelming feeling of being finished and done.
Powerful stuff. It's interesting as I think about that. Oftentimes we cross our fingers and hope bad things don't happen, hope tough times don't come. Kind of like, oh my goodness, I hope I don't have to go through hard times. Rather than that, what if all of us who are listening were to say, challenging times will come. It's how I prepare for them, right? It's how I actually prepare my mind to say, how's this going to get better? And, what's the next step? How do I have relentless forward motion? So many just nuggets of absolute wisdom you've left with us today, Scott. So I want to thank you for coming in. This has been a blast for me.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about it, Justin. It's been great.
My 2-mile run this morning was even different this morning since we had this conversation yesterday. So you've got me thinking about what's next.
Nice.
So anyway, and hopefully we've inspired some others here that are listening, whether it be physical training, whether it be business, whether it be whatever. Think bigger, act bigger, so you can have a bigger impact like Scott has done for us. So anyway, thanks again for being here, and look forward to connecting with you all soon. Have a great day. We want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Think Bigger Mastermind with Steve Yeager and Justin Stoddard. Now, here's how you can show us some digital love in return. Number 1, subscribe to our show. Number 2, give us a review. Number 3, share this with a friend. And number 4, go think bigger.